Hi folks, welcome to this short lecture on calculating your weighted average common shares when you have a share dividend and a share split. So now in this lecture we're going to show you what impact a share dividend or a share split has on your WACS calculation, that's your weighted average common share calculation, as well as your earnings per share calculation. So let's begin. We know that whenever we issue new shares, whether it's through a share dividend or a share split, we know that more shares are going to be outstanding. So that's just going to mean that your weighted average common shares outstanding are going to increase. So now, how do we actually use this information to help us calculate our WACS? Well, the rule here that I've got is that all of the shares that existed that were outstanding before the share dividend or the share split all have to be restated for that share dividend or share split as if they had been or as if it had occurred at the beginning of the year, meaning that as if the share split or share dividend had occurred at the beginning of the year. Now, why do we have that rule? Well, it makes sense in accounting because all of those outstanding shares are going to be subject to the share split or the share dividend, regardless of what you've issued, because all the shares that existed at that date are entitled to it. That's what it means when you split shares. All of the outstanding shares are entitled to it, and those shares were outstanding, or the shares that you have now were outstanding before you declared and issued the split or the dividend, so they all get it. Okay, so now let's have a look to see how this will work if you have a share dividend. So here it says Kingsley Production reported $741,500 in net income. They declared preferred share dividends of $66,500. We can see that they started 2011 with 60,000 shares. Then in March, they declared and issued a 30% share dividend. So we know from January to the end of March, we had 60,000 shares outstanding, right? We also know that once March the 1st rolled around until August 1st, so that takes us from March the 1st to July 31st, that's when we declared and issued a 30% share dividend. So that share dividend is going to be applied to these shares, right? Now, in August, we sold common shares for cash, and we sold more common shares for cash November the 1st. So let's have a look at how that's going to affect our WACS calculation. Well, we've already determined that from January 1st to just before we declared that share dividend, i.e. February 28th, we had 60,000 shares outstanding, and that represents 2 out of 12 months of the year. Now here we are, March the 1st, and we know from March the 1st to July 31st, we had more shares outstanding because we issued a 30% share dividend. All right. So now, why am I only going to August the 31st? Because on August the 1st, something else happens. I issue more shares. So let me just focus here. I know now that I'm going to have 78,000 shares outstanding for the next 5 months. But of these 78,000, those 60,000 are also going to be subject to that share dividend. So I'm going to multiply that by 1.3. Why 1.3? Because those 60 shares, once I multiplied by 1.3, that 0.3 representing my share dividend percent, that means I'm going to have 78,000 shares outstanding over that 2-month period, right? Even though the split wasn't declared and issued until here, they're still getting the benefit of it because they were there. Now don't forget, these 78,000 shares are already with the dividend. So 60,000 times 1.3, we've already got the share dividend in here, so I don't need to multiply that by 1.3. I just multiply that by 1, right? Similarly here, I just multiply this by 1 because from August the 1st to October 31st, I had issued another 20,000 common shares, right? Well, that 98 is part of that 78, right? Those already have the share dividend. So if part of these shares already have it as well. These 20,000 are not going to get the share dividend because they weren't there March the 1st. That was declared, that 30% was declared March the 1st. Okay, so anybody who had shares before that is going to get the extra shares, but these guys came in the game after. They entered the game after. They don't get the benefits that the guys previous to them got, right? So I've only got 98,000 shares, and here when I issued on November 1st another 40,000, that means for this 2-month period I'm going to have 138,000 shares, but I'm just going to multiply that by 1. So what's my WACS going to be now? Well, again, I can calculate it period by period. And if I do that, I'm going to have WACS here of 13,000 for January 1st to February 28th on average, 32,500 from March 1st to July 31st, 24,500 from November the 1st or August the 1st to October 31st, and for the last 2 months of the year, 23,000 to give me a WACS of 93,000. So just note this column here, right in here, and what's happening. Again, we know that at this point in time, this is when we issued the share dividend, right? So that's why we have 78,000. 60,000 plus 30% more, which would be 18,000, is going to give us in total 78,000. But the people that were here, even though they're partly in here, or the shares that were outstanding here, even though they're included here, I have to multiply them by 1.32 because they're getting the benefit of that share dividend, right? So therefore, I have to multiply that by 1.3 because those shares are going to be subject to the share dividend. These already have the share dividend in them, so I don't need to multiply them by 1.3. I just got to multiply them by 1. Or, if you wish, don't multiply them by anything. You don't have to. Anything times 1 is the number itself. So if that's confusing you, you can just pull it out if you want. It's up to you. But I do have to do this because the rule says I got to reflect the split or the dividend as if it occurred at the beginning of the year. And this is the beginning of the year. If the split had occurred here, or if the share dividend had occurred here, then I got to multiply all of the previous periods. That would be 2 periods, this one and this one, by 1.3. So whenever you see that share dividend or share split, whatever it is, but in this case dividend happening, go back to all the previous periods, in this case we only have 1, and multiply it by 1 plus the share dividend multiple, which is 30%, or in this case times 1.3. Now, if you need to take a break and replay the video, I totally understand that. Now would be a good time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to another example where there is a share split. So those of you that want to come along with me, that's great. Those of you who might want a break to review the video we just completed, feel free to do so. Now, with our previous example, I forgot, I wasn't finished. Now that we've got this WACS calculated here, this is with the share dividend example, I'm going to now calculate my EPS by taking my net income, which I was given in the problem for Kingsley, dividing it by, or subtracting from the numerator the number of, the amount of the preferred share dividend that was declared that year, and divide it by my WACS that I calculated to get $7.26 a share. Now, some of the rules or things that I want you to note here is that a share dividend will cause WACS to increase, all right? And that means that our EPS calculation is going to decrease. Why? Because the effect of a share dividend or a share split, in this case a dividend, does nothing to the numerator. It doesn't affect net income, and it doesn't affect the amount of the preferred share dividend, but it does affect your WACS. So if the numerator is constant, meaning it doesn't change, and your WACS increases, any share dividend that's declared and issued throughout the period will only serve to decrease or lower your EPS and increase your weighted average common shares outstanding. So now, let's have a look at the share split example that we have here. Now, we have an example here where a company reported $480,000 in income for 2011. They had a $65,000 preferred share dividend, and at the beginning of that year, the company had 50,000 shares outstanding. That's their common. During the year, not until June, they sold 30,000 common shares for cash. On August the 31st, they purchased and retired 13,000 shares, that's the common, and on October 1st, they completed a 3-for-1 share split. So now, let's see how the share split impacts our WACS calculation. So now, let me just go down here, All right, actually, first of all, I want you to calculate net income available to common shareholders. So we found from the question that we had net income of $480,000 less our preferred share dividend that was declared. So whether it's cumulative or not doesn't matter. It was declared. We deduct it, and that means we have $415,000 available for distribution to common shareholders. So now, before we can calculate EPS, we need to calculate WACS. So now we're going to go down here and set up a table very similar to what we did when we had the share dividend. The only thing that I'm changing here in this column is to say, instead of the effect of the dividend, the share dividend, I'm going to say, what's the effect of the share split? So now, what do we know? Well, let me just minimize this a touch. It's said here that on June the 1st, we sold 30,000 shares. But we had 50,000 outstanding until that point. So from January to the end of May, we had 50,000 shares outstanding. I'm leaving the split blank for now. That means over that 5-month period from January 1st to May 30th, I had 50,000 shares outstanding. On June the 1st, I added 30,000 to this total to make it 80,000. Okay, and I had those outstanding June, July, and August. So why am I ending in August? Because in September, on August the 31st, that's when I repurchased and retired 13,000 common shares. So starting September the 1st, okay, I now had 13,000 shares less than I had the previous period. Why? Because I bought them back from my shareholders. So I took common shares off my books. So the number of common shares I got off my books were 13,000. So that means I have 67,000 out there now in the marketplace. Now, what happened October 1st? Well, on October 1st, I completed a 3-for-1 share split. So that means for October, November, and December, for 3 months, I had 67,000 times 3 for the split. It means I had 201,000 shares outstanding. But don't forget the rule. The rule says you go back and restate all the previous periods as if the share split had been outstanding from the beginning. Because don't forget, all of these shares are also going to get the benefit of the split. Now, you may think with the share dividend or with the share split, some of you may think, hey, we're double counting here because these 50,000 shares are part of this 80,000. If we keep multiplying everything by 3, we're exponentiating this. It's getting far too big. Well, no, don't forget, there's no overlap because the fraction of the year is independent. These 5 months don't overlap these 3 months. They're different parts of the year. They're different parts of the year. But the idea, again, behind going and backdating these splits, or in the previous example, the dividends, is because these 50,000 shares, okay, are also going to get the benefit of that split. As are these 80,000, which are outstanding for a different 3-month period than these 50,000 are outstanding for. This same logic of fraction of the year being independent or mutually exclusive also holds for the share dividend. All right. So now we've got what? 67,000 shares here also getting the split, but don't forget these are already split. So we can multiply that by 1, or like I said before, if it confuses you, any number multiplied by 1 is just the number itself. So if that bugs you, you can take that out. No problem. So now let's calculate our WACS. So what we've got here is we've got our weighted average common shares at 62,500 from this line, right? We've got 60,000 from this line, 16,750 from this line, and from this line 50,200. So our WACS is 189,500. And we can use this to calculate our EPS by taking our 415,000 that's available to common shareholders, dividing it by the WACS we calculated to get $2.19 a share. So again, note, just as we found with the share dividend, the share split will cause an increase in our WACS because we're issuing more shares. And when you issue more shares, that doesn't have any effect on net income, and it doesn't have any effect on the preferred share dividend because the shares we're issuing are common shares, not preferreds. So the numerator in the EPS calculation is not changed by the share split in this case, or a share dividend for that matter, but it does increase your WACS. So therefore, we know that our EPS will get smaller or will decrease when we have a share split. So now, if you feel you need to see this video again, feel free to do so. And this concludes our presentation of the effect of a share dividend or a share split on our WACS calculation.